The November rain fell in sheets across San Francisco, cold and relentless, turning the streets into rivers of neon and desperation. Mia Vasquez stood outside the five-star hotel where she had worked for 3 years, her black and white maid's uniform soaked through, her hands trembling not from the cold but from the weight of a single crumpled piece of paper in her pocket. The foreclosure notice. 48 hours until her apartment was gone. 5 days until Oliver needed an $85,000 valve replacement or his 7-year-old heart would simply stop beating. She had $2 in her pocket. $2. That was all the world had left for her. Preston Mercer emerged from the hotel's gleaming entrance, his tailored suit pristine, his smile poisonous. He was 53 years old, with slicked-back hair gone grey at the temples and the kind of face that made service workers instinctively look away. He moved like a man who had never been told no, who took what he wanted from people who had nothing left to give. "Mia," he called, his voice dripping with false warmth. A word. She turned. This was always how it started. A word. A gesture toward the storage room. A reminder that her son's survival depended on her keeping this job, on her keeping her mouth shut, on her being grateful for the meager tips he hadn't stolen. "I need my tips from last week," she said, her voice barely audible above the rain. "The ones from the Blackwell party." "You took them?" Preston's face hardened into something cruel. "Those tips were for the hotel's maintenance fund. You should be thanking me for letting you work here at all. A woman in your position, a single mother, living in that basement apartment, no education, no future. You're lucky to have anything." He stepped closer, and she stepped back, her shoulders hitting the cold brick wall of the hotel. "Besides," he continued, "if you want to keep working, you need to be nicer to the guests. More accommodating. There's a room on the 3rd floor. Room 317. Mr. Blackwell has expressed interest in." "No." The word hung in the rain between them like a knife. "No." His laugh was ice and venom. "You don't get to say no. You're fired. Effective immediately. Don't bother coming back for your final check. Anything owed to you is forfeited for breach of conduct." He turned and walked back into the hotel, and Mia's knees buckled. She sank down onto the wet concrete, rain streaming down her face mixing with tears she couldn't stop, her breathing shallow and fractured. 3 years. 3 years of arriving at 4 in the morning, of cleaning rooms where people left crumbs and disdain in equal measure, of accepting that she was the kind of woman that men like Preston Mercer could speak to this way. Oliver was home with Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor who watched him on the nights Mia worked doubles. Mrs. Chen was kind, but she was old, and she couldn't afford to lose the money Mia paid her. Without this job, there was no money. Without money, there was no surgery. Without surgery, there was only the slow mathematics of a failing heart. She sat in the rain for how long, she didn't know. Time moved differently when your life was collapsing. It could have been 5 minutes or 50. Eventually, a black SUV pulled to the curb in front of the hotel, then another, then another. 5 vehicles in total, each one massive and gleaming, the kind of cars that made pedestrians instinctively look away. Tinted windows. Expensive. Dangerous. Men in dark suits emerged from the vehicles, moving with the coordinated precision of people trained in violence. They were escorting someone out of the hotel. Mia recognized the man immediately. Everyone in San Francisco knew that face, that silhouette. Luca Moretti. She had cleaned his mansion for 3 years without ever seeing him directly. He was a ghost who haunted his own home, moving through rooms at hours when servants weren't present, leaving behind only the faint smell of expensive cologne and something else, something like grief, though she had never understood how grief could have a smell until she encountered his. He was tall, perhaps 6'2", with shoulders that filled his tailored charcoal suit as if the fabric had been stitched around stone. His hair was dark, silvered slightly at the temples, and he wore it swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and controlled fury. A scar ran from the corner of his left eye to his cheekbone, thin and precise, the kind of scar that had a story. His eyes were dark gray, the color of storm clouds, and they held the kind of emptiness that comes from losing something irreplaceable. A gold watch caught the neon light on his left wrist. His right hand was bare except for a single silver ring on his middle finger. He descended the hotel steps with the unhurried pace of a man who owned the ground beneath his feet. His men surrounded him in a protective perimeter, their eyes constantly scanning, constantly assessing threats. He didn't notice Mia sitting against the wall. She was exactly what she had always been, invisible. But then something fell. Something small and dark that tumbled from his coat pocket and landed on the rain-slicked pavement directly in front of her. A wallet. Mia picked it up, her hands moving on instinct before her mind caught up with what her body was doing. She opened it. Inside was cash, hundreds of dollars, maybe thousands, credit cards, identification. And a photograph. A woman with dark hair and eyes that held the same sharp intelligence as the man who had just walked past her. She was holding a newborn baby, wrapped in a blue blanket, her smile radiant with a joy so complete it seemed to fill the photograph itself. On the back, written in careful script, Lucia and Thomas. The best day. Mia had cleaned his mansion for 3 years. She knew about the nursery on the 3rd floor that no one was allowed to enter. She knew about the room he locked after midnight, the room where a crib still sat, undisturbed, with a name painted on the wall in letters she had glimpsed once when the door had been left ajar. Thomas. His son's name was Thomas. The baby in the photograph was dead. Had to be. The way Luca Moretti moved through the world was the movement of a man carrying a grave inside his chest. She didn't think. She just ran, the wallet gripped in her trembling hand, into the rain, following the black SUVs as they pulled into traffic, a uniform soaked through, a shoe splashing through puddles that reflected the city's neon like broken stars. She ran until her lungs screamed, until her legs betrayed her, until she collapsed against a storefront window 3 blocks away, gasping, alive in the only way she knew how, by doing something kind for someone who would never know her name. She looked down at the wallet in her hands. The photograph of the woman and the dead baby. The man who was already gone, already receding into the night in his vehicles of steel and power. What Mia did not understand in that moment was that everything was about to change. That the act of returning this wallet, this small, invisible gesture from a nobody made to the city's most dangerous man, would set into motion a sequence of events that would destroy her enemies and rebuild her world from its foundations. She looked at the wallet. Then at the street ahead where the black SUVs had disappeared into the darkness. She took a breath and began walking. Mia Vasquez stands in a bathroom stall at the San Francisco General Hospital, her forehead pressed against cold tile, counting the money in her palm for the 3rd time that morning. $2. Actual dollars, not metaphorical ones. 2 $1 bills that had somehow survived the week when everything else, her dignity, her job, her ability to feed her son, had not. The fluorescent lights hum above her, casting her reflection in the mirror like a ghost haunting a place that didn't want her there. Her black and white maid's uniform is still damp from the rain, the hem stained with something dark that might have been coffee or might have been tears. She can't remember when she last changed clothes. She can't remember when she last slept. The doctor had been clear. $90,000. That was the new number now. $90,000 for Oliver's valve replacement. The previous number had been 85. The money kept climbing like a fever no amount of prayer could break. She shoves the $2 back into her uniform pocket, next to a crumpled piece of paper so worn it's beginning to tear at the folds. The foreclosure notice. Her landlord had slipped it under her apartment door 2 mornings ago. 60 days, it said. 60 days to gather $80,000 she did not have or leave the only home her son had ever known. The mathematics of her desperation is simple and brutal. Oliver needs $90,000. She needs $80,000 for the apartment. That is $170,000. She has $2. And 5 days. Because that is all the time the doctors gave her before Oliver's heart would no longer be able to wait. The bathroom door swings open. Mia straightens, her hands washing themselves under the cold water with the muscle memory of someone who has learned to disappear the moment a sound enters the room. The woman at the sink next to her is wearing a white coat and a wedding ring. She does not look at Mia. Nobody ever looks at Mia. Mia leaves the bathroom and walks back toward the pediatric ward, her shoes squeaking against the linoleum. The hallway smells like antiseptic and something else underneath it, fear, maybe. The smell of families at the edge of what they can afford. Room 317 is 3 doors down. She can see Oliver through the small window in the door, his 7-year-old frame impossibly small in the hospital bed, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that will kill him if it remains unchanged. She enters quietly. Oliver's eyes are closed, his fingers still gripping the toy car she'd bought at a garage sale for 50 cents last summer. The car is blue. Oliver had named it Thomas because it was the color of nothing happy, he'd said. The color of the sky before a storm. He'd been 4 years old and already speaking in metaphors no child should understand. Mommy. His voice is soft, barely there, like his speaking from underneath water. Did you find the money? Mia sits on the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle the fall line that runs from his small arm to a bag of fluid that costs $40 a day just to hang there. She takes his hand. His skin is cool. It shouldn't be cool. A child's skin should be warm. Still looking, baby, she says. The lie tastes like rust. I'm still looking. Mr. Chen at the restaurant, Oliver says, his eyes still closed, he said you quit. He said you hit him. Mia's jaw tightens. That's not what happened. What happened was different. What happened was that Preston Mercer, the owner of the Harbor View Hotel's restaurant, had cornered her in the walk-in cooler again, had pressed himself against her while she was trying to retrieve the soup stock, had whispered that if she wanted to keep her job, her only job, the one that paid enough to cover the hospital visits, she would need to be nicer to him. And Mia had turned around with the soup pot still in her hands and had let it slip. Not hit him. Let it slip. Accidentally. The boiling broth had splashed across his chest and his neck, and he had screamed like he was being murdered, and Mia had run. That had been 3 days ago. She had not been back. I didn't quit, Mia tells Oliver, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. His hair is still thick and dark, like hers. I just needed to find something better. Something that pays more. Oliver asks. Yes. Something that would pay for my heart. Mia closes her eyes. In 3 days of not working, she has lost $300 in tips she would have made. In 3 days of not working, Oliver's surgery has moved 48 hours closer. In 3 days of not working, the foreclosure notice has moved 3 days closer to the date when the locks will be changed and her belongings will be set on the street in cardboard boxes. We'll figure it out, she says, and it is not a lie. It is just something that sounds like it could be true if you don't listen too carefully. She stays with him until his breathing deepens into sleep, until the toy car slips from his fingers and she catches it before it hits the floor. Then she leaves the hospital again, back into the San Francisco November, where the rain has not stopped in 3 days and shows no signs of stopping. The water runs down the streets in rivers of dark gray. Umbrellas are useless. Mia doesn't own an umbrella anyway. She walks toward the warehouse district, toward the mansion that has been her daytime home for 3 years. The Moretti mansion sits back from the street like it belongs to a different world, one where people don't count dollars and foreclosure notices don't exist. The iron gates are open. They are always open during the day. The woman who cleans the mansion comes and goes. Nobody notices her. Nobody has ever noticed her. She lets herself in through the service entrance, into the mudroom where the black and white uniforms hang in a row. She changes quickly, hanging her damp clothes on the hook where nobody will look. The mansion is quiet this time of day. Mr. Moretti is at his offices downtown. His men come and go, but they are also invisible to each other in the way of people who have learned not to see the staff. The 3rd floor is where she is not supposed to go. The doors up there are closed, and one of them is locked. But the hall closet on the 3rd floor holds the good linens, the ones that are changed once a week, and that is her excuse if anyone asks. It is never a good excuse, but she goes anyway because something about that locked door calls to her in a way she cannot explain. Maybe it is because she is desperate. Maybe it is because she is a mother and she understands the kind of weight that makes you lock a door and never open it again. She opens the closet and pulls out the fresh linens, her hands moving through their practiced routine. White sheets. Pillowcases. A fleece blanket that probably costs more than her monthly rent. She is reaching for a second blanket when she sees it, the leather wallet, fallen behind the bottom shelf, half hidden by dust. She should leave it. Should pretend she never saw it. But her fingers have already closed around it, and she is already opening it without permission, already looking at the photograph inside. A woman, young and beautiful, with dark hair and eyes that hold 1,000 quiet jokes. And in her arms, a baby. An infant, perfect and tiny, his face round and serious, his eyes already looking at the camera like he understood something nobody else did. And written on the back of the photograph in careful handwriting, Thomas. The best day. Mia's hands begin to shake. She hears the footsteps before she sees him. The sound of shoes on marble from 2 floors below, moving with purpose, moving toward the stairs. She doesn't think. She runs. The November rain fell in sheets across San Francisco, and Mia Vasquez had exactly $2 in her pocket. $2. That was everything. That was the gap between her son Oliver's survival and his death. $50,000 had evaporated when Preston Mercer, the hotel manager where she worked, stole her tip jar and fired her for refusing his hands on her body in the storage room. $90,000 more she did not have. 5 days remained until the surgery that would save her 7-year-old son's heart, and she was walking through the rain in a maid's uniform that did not belong to her anymore, because she had stolen it just to look for work. This is the story of a woman so invisible that society had taught her to believe she deserved nothing. This is the story of what happens when a man who has lost everything decides she deserves everything. Meanwhile, in a mansion overlooking the city, Luca Moretti stood at a floor-to-ceiling window and watched the rain destroy the evening. He was tall, broad-shouldered, 43 years old but carved from something harder than marble. His dark hair was threaded with silver at the temples. He wore an open white dress shirt that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, and a gold watch that had belonged to his father. On his left hand, a silver ring bore the mark of the Moretti family, unbroken for 4 generations. But there was something broken in his eyes. Storm gray eyes that had seen things that changed men into something else entirely. A thin scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, and he did not speak about how it got there. He never spoke about many things. 15 years ago, on a winter night very much like this one, his wife Maria had given birth to a son. Thomas. The baby had lived for 7 hours. 7 hours and 42 minutes. The doctors had explained something about the lungs, about development, about things that happen sometimes and could not be prevented. Luca had held his son for those 7 hours and 42 minutes. He had memorized every inch of the infant's face, had traced the curve of his ears, had whispered 1,000 promises into the darkness. When the nurses took the baby away, Luca Moretti had walked into the nursery of his mansion and locked the door. That was 15 years ago. The door remained locked. The crib still stood in the center of the room, still dressed in white linens, still waiting for a child who would never come home. His wife Maria had left him 3 months later. She could not live in a house with a locked door. She could not live with a man whose grief had calcified into something harder than stone. So Luca Moretti had built an empire instead. He had taken the Moretti family business and expanded it across San Francisco and the surrounding counties. Legitimate enterprises on the surface, restaurants, hotels, real estate holdings, investment firms. And beneath that surface, the other business. The kind that did not appear in newspapers. His men, Marco and Nino and the others, they moved through the city like shadows, and what they did without question. Luca paid them well. He protected them. He never asked them to do anything he would not do himself. In 15 years, no one had challenged his authority. In 15 years, no one had died who did not deserve to die. This was his code. This was his burden. He did not know that the maid who cleaned his mansion every Tuesday and Friday had found his wallet. He did not know that she had seen the photograph of Maria and the baby. He did not know that she had returned it, slipping it back into his study without leaving a name, without asking for a reward, because she was the kind of woman who had learned to be invisible in a world that was very good at not seeing people like her. He did not know that in 5 days, his entire life would pivot on the axis of $2 in a woman's pocket and a son whose heart was failing. At 4:22 in the afternoon on the day after Mia found the photograph, the doorbell at Luca's mansion chimed. Marco answered it, and standing on the marble steps was a woman in a black and white maid's uniform, soaked through from the rain, her hands trembling not from cold but from terror. She was 28 years old but looked older, her face lean from hunger, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Her dark hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to cause her pain. But there was something in those eyes that Marco recognized. Desperation. The kind that makes people do things they never thought they would do. "I need to speak with him," she said. Her voice was barely audible, fractured like glass dropped on tile. "Please." "It is about his wallet." "The photograph. I found it 3 weeks ago and I returned it, but I need to ask him for something and I do not know how to ask without explaining everything and I am standing in the rain because I have nowhere else to go." Marco did not move. He had been instructed never to let anyone through without approval, and he had learned long ago not to break Luca's rules. But something in the way she was shaking made him turn and walk deeper into the mansion. 2 minutes later, he returned. "Come," he said. Luca was in his study, and the moment she entered, he recognized her. Not from seeing her before, because he had barely registered the maid who came on Tuesdays and Fridays. But he recognized her from the way his wallet had reappeared on his desk 3 weeks ago, placed with care on his leather appointment book, nothing taken, nothing damaged. He recognized her from the fact that someone in his household had returned something precious without asking for anything in return. He rose from behind his desk, and Mia's breath caught. She had seen him before, moving through the hallways of his mansion, always with 2 men nearby, always dressed in clothes that cost more than she would earn in a lifetime. But she had never been alone in a room with him. She had never understood the full weight of his presence. He was 6'1", his shoulders filling the space, his cashmere coat draped over the chair behind him, the fabric so luxurious it looked like liquid money. His face was angular and severe, the scar along his cheekbone making him look dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with the gun she knew he carried. "You returned my wallet," he said. His voice was like thunder rolling across an empty highway, low and inevitable. "Yes," she whispered. "Why?" She opened her mouth. Closed it. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times while cleaning his bathrooms, 1,000 times while standing in line at the hospital. But standing in front of him, with his storm-grey eyes fixed on hers, all the rehearsal evaporated. "Because my son is dying," she said instead. The words came out like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples she could not control. "His name is Oliver. He is 7 years old. He has a hole in his heart, and there is a doctor in Boston who can fix it, but the surgery costs $85,000. I had $50,000 saved. I saved it for 5 years by working double shifts and eating less than my son so he could eat more. But 3 weeks ago, my manager at the hotel, Preston Mercer, he fired me after I refused to let him touch me in the storage room. He stole the $50,000 from my tip jar and told me he would destroy me if I reported it. I have $2 left. $2. And the surgery needs to happen in 5 days." She stopped. Her hands were still shaking. She had not mentioned the foreclosure notice that had arrived that morning, the notice that said her apartment was being taken from her in 14 days. She had not mentioned that she had not eaten anything that day because she was saving the $2 for Oliver's lunch tomorrow. She had not mentioned that she had considered doing things she swore she would never do, considered going back to that hotel and finding Preston Mercer and offering her body to him if he would return even part of what he had stolen. She had not mentioned that thought because it made her feel like she was already disappearing, already becoming invisible even to herself. Luca did not move. He simply watched her, and in his watching, she felt seen in a way she had never been seen before. Not as a maid. Not as invisible. Not as a woman who deserved nothing because she had nothing. "What is your name?" he asked. "Mia Vasquez." "Sit," he said. She sat in the leather chair across from his desk. He reached for his phone and made a call, his voice steady and authoritative, speaking to someone named Dr. Brenner in Boston, confirming that yes, the surgery could be performed in 5 days, confirming that yes, the cost was $85,000, and authorizing the charge to his account without hesitation. The entire conversation took 3 minutes and 17 seconds. When he hung up, he looked at her and said, "Your son will have his surgery." Mia did not cry. Her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus 2 years ago. Instead, she simply stared at him, unable to process the words he had spoken. "Why?" she asked. The same question she had asked before, but now it carried different weight. This time, she was asking why anyone would help a nobody. Why a man like this would notice a woman like her. "Because the people who did this believed you were nobody," he said quietly. Preston Mercer believed you were nobody. Evelyn Blackwell, his employer, believed you were nobody. And that belief needs to be corrected. 3 blocks away, in an office overlooking the same rain-soaked city, Evelyn Blackwell was reading a report on her phone. Evelyn was 58 years old, her face pulled tight by cosmetic surgery, her hair a shade of blonde that did not exist in nature. She wore a dress that cost more than a car, and diamonds caught the light at her ears and throat. She had built an empire of luxury hotels across California, and beneath that empire, she had built a second empire of exploitation. Young women from poor families, desperate for work, they came to her hotels looking for employment. She gave it to them. And then she trained her managers to use them, abuse them, extract value from them in ways that had nothing to do with their labor. When the women tried to report it, her lawyers made them disappear. When they tried to sue, she paid them off with money that felt large to them but was nothing to her. Preston Mercer was one of her favorite managers. He was crude and predictable, and he understood that there was no consequence for his actions because Evelyn Blackwell would always protect him. She did not know that Mia Vasquez had walked into that mansion with $2 in her pocket. She did not know that she had set something in motion that would consume her world. At 7:15 that evening, Marco appeared in Mia's old apartment with a black SUV and $500 in cash for groceries, for Oliver's medication, for heat in her apartment until the surgery. He did not smile. He simply handed her an envelope and told her that Luca Moretti had sent him. Then he was gone, the black SUV dissolving into the rain like it had never existed. Mia opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was $500 and a note written in careful handwriting. One sentence, "Your son will not want for anything." She held the note against her chest and finally, the tears came. The mountain lodge stood against the November darkness like a fortress built to keep the world out. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed only the reflection of firelight and snow, the blizzard outside so thick that the forest beyond had simply ceased to exist. Mia Vasquez sat on the edge of an antique chair in the study, her black and white maid's uniform wrinkled from 3 days of travel, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. On the table beside her was a crumpled foreclosure notice dated 4 days ago. The house she had rented for 7 years. Gone. The surgery Oliver needed cost $85,000. She had $2 in her pocket. 2. Outside, the wind howled against the stone walls like something alive and furious. Inside, the grandfather clock in the hallway ticked toward midnight. Mia had not eaten since that morning. She had not slept in 36 hours. The only reason she was still sitting upright was because Luca Moretti had asked her to wait here while he made a phone call, and she had learned long ago that when powerful men asked you to do things, you did them exactly as instructed, without questions, without complaint, without hope. She thought of Oliver at his grandmother's apartment in the city. 7 years old, with his father's dark eyes and her own stubborn chin. The cardiologist had been very clear. The valve replacement needed to happen within 5 days or the deterioration would become irreversible. 5 days. That was 48 hours ago. Now there were 3 days left. 3 days to find $85,000 that did not exist, that had never existed, that existed only in the space between impossible and catastrophe. Preston Mercer had made sure of that. When she refused his advances at the hotel, when she pulled away from his hands, when she told him she would report him, he had simply smiled. Then he fired her. Then he took the tip jar she had filled over 8 months. $1,700. Everything she had managed to save after rent and medications and the grocery store's cheapest options. He had emptied it into his pocket while his security watched, while other managers laughed, while the hotel's owner, Evelyn Blackwell, pretended not to see it from her office on the 20th floor. The study door opened. Luca Moretti entered, and the temperature in the room seemed to change. He wore a charcoal sweater that fit him like something tailored by hands that understood power. His hair was still wet from the snow. At his temples, silver caught the firelight. The scar running from his left eye down to his cheekbone had gone pale in the cold. He looked at her with eyes that had seen suffering and chosen to transform it into something sharper. "The surgery is scheduled," he said. His voice was quiet, steady as a pulse. "Tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. St. Mary's Hospital, Pediatric Cardiac Wing." Mia's breath caught. "I cannot pay for it. I have been trying to explain. There is no amount of work, no amount of time. You do not need to pay for it," Luca said. He sat down across from her, and Marco appeared in the doorway, remaining still as stone. "I have already paid for it. The doctors have been instructed. Your son will be taken care of." The words did not land properly. They moved toward her like something from another language, something her exhausted mind could not immediately translate. "Why? You do not know me. You do not know Oliver. Why would you?" "Because Preston Mercer was not done with you," Luca said, and his tone changed. It became something colder, something with edges. That is what Marco discovered this afternoon. Mercer and Evelyn Blackwell have been working together for years. She provides the protection. He provides the muscle. When you walked away from him, when you refused him, he made a decision. He was going to make sure you were too broken to testify against him when his time came. Mia's hands began to shake. "He has a file on you," Luca continued. "Names of people he could hurt. Your landlord, who you owe 3 months' rent. Your grandmother, who has already had 1 stroke. Your son, who cannot run from anyone." He leaned forward slightly. "He was going to hurt Oliver, Mia. He was going to hurt him and tell you it was your fault for refusing him. That was his plan. That is why we are here. That is why I am here." The room tilted. She gripped the armrests of the chair and did not fall. The wind outside screamed against the windows like it was trying to break through, trying to reach her, and for a moment she believed it might succeed. For a moment, the weight of everything, the foreclosure, the debt, the hunger, the desperate arithmetic of survival, pressed down so hard she thought her ribs would crack. But then Oliver's face appeared in her mind. Not as he was now, thin and careful with his breathing, rationing his movements because even running exhausted his failing heart. But as he would be. Healed. Whole. Real. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "I want you to survive," Luca said. "And I want Preston Mercer to understand that there is a cost for touching what is mine." At that exact moment, 11:38 in the evening, 12 black SUVs were moving through the frozen streets of San Francisco. Men in charcoal suits and black overcoats sat perfectly still in the darkness, their faces expressions of absolute focus. Marco had given them 1 hour to get into position. 1 hour to seal every exit of the Blackwell Hotel. 1 hour to prepare. Preston Mercer was on the 22nd floor, in Evelyn Blackwell's private suite, celebrating a victory. They had just received notification that Mia Vasquez's apartment building was being seized. The city had finally processed the foreclosure. By morning, she would be homeless. By next week, she would either be desperate enough to recant her testimony or dead enough that her testimony would no longer matter. He was pouring champagne when the doors came down. The federal agents moved like water, fluid and unstoppable. They came through the suite's private entrance, the public entrance, the balcony doors. They had a warrant signed by a federal judge, sealed since Wednesday, with Mia Vasquez's formal statement of harassment, theft, and conspiracy attached. With the testimony of 17 other women, documented over 8 years, with hospital records and lawyer letters and photographs. Preston Mercer tried to run. He made it 3 steps before Marco appeared in his path, and Marco did not need to touch him. Mercer simply stopped, understanding in that instant that there was nowhere to go, no distance he could cover, no speed he could achieve that would matter. He collapsed onto his knees. His face became something unrecognizable. He begged. The words came out incoherent, broken, desperate. He offered money. He offered to leave California. He offered anything, everything, his home, his savings, his freedom. None of it meant anything. None of it would ever mean anything again. The federal agent reading his rights sounded like she was reciting a prayer. 3 floors below, Evelyn Blackwell was having her evening tea in the hotel restaurant when her phone rang. Then it rang again. Then it did not stop ringing. Her lawyer was calling. Her accountant was calling. News outlets were calling. Someone had leaked the footage. The security footage from the night she had watched Preston Mercer steal Mia's tips. The night she had smiled and looked away. The video was everywhere, on social media, on news broadcasts, on the feeds of every major network. By 2:17 in the morning, 12 million people had seen her face. By morning, that number would be 40 million. Her business partners were sending emails demanding her resignation. Her board was preparing a statement condemning her actions. Her reputation, built over 40 years, was being dismantled in real time, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. When federal agents arrived at her home at 5:44 in the morning, she was already in her study, writing a resignation letter that no one wanted. She signed documents transferring ownership of her hotels to a trust that would use the profits to establish a foundation for hospitality workers. She submitted to arrest in her own living room, standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows as the sun rose over the city, understanding that she was about to lose everything. Preston Mercer received 40 years in federal prison. The federal judge, a woman who had listened to Mia's testimony for 2 hours without interrupting, had been absolutely clear. This is not a first offense. These are not actions taken in a moment of passion or desperation. This is a systematic, calculated campaign of exploitation and violence. 40 years. And restitution of $200,000 to the victims' fund. When the news broke, when the networks reported the conviction, when every detail of Preston Mercer's crimes was laid bare for the city to see, the people he had worked with simply disappeared. Colleagues who had protected him sent letters of apology. Managers who had enabled him resigned. The hotel's owners issued statements of deep regret. No one wanted to be associated with him anymore. No one wanted to risk their own freedom, their own reputation. He was transported to federal prison in Sacramento on a Tuesday afternoon, wearing an orange jumpsuit, his face covered by his hands. When the cameras caught him, when the images were broadcast, no one saw the manager who had once seemed powerful. They saw a man destroyed by his own choices. They saw what happened when you targeted someone who was connected to Luca Moretti. They saw justice. Evelyn Blackwell received 12 years. Her lawyers fought for a lighter sentence, but the judge was unmoved. She had been complicit. She had enabled. She had profited from the suffering of desperate women. 12 years was not mercy. It was acknowledgement that some harms were too great to ignore. When she was led away, her former business partners did not visit her. Her board did not advocate for her. The women whose lives she had destroyed did not celebrate. They simply healed. They simply survived. They simply moved forward into days that no longer held her in them. In the mountain lodge, 3 days after Oliver's surgery, Mia stood at the window and watched the snow stop falling. The blizzard had passed. The forest beyond the glass had returned to visibility. In the distance, she could see smoke rising from a neighbor's chimney, the simple sign of ordinary life continuing in the ordinary world. Luca appeared beside her, keeping a careful distance. He held a folder. "The doctors say Oliver will make a full recovery," he said. "No restrictions. No limitations. A normal life." Mia could not speak. Her hands were shaking again, but for a different reason now. The shaking came from relief so profound it felt like collapsing into safety. "There is something else," Luca continued. He opened the folder. Inside was a deed. Not to the apartment she had lost, but to a small house. 3 bedrooms. A yard. Clean. Safe. Legally transferred into her name with no debt attached. "This is yours. It always was. I just needed to make it official." She looked at him, this man she had known for 5 days, this man who had saved her son, who had destroyed the people who had tried to destroy her. Why, she asked again, because she still did not understand. "Because," Luca said quietly, "you returned my wife's photograph when you could have kept it. You returned the most precious thing I had lost, and you asked for nothing in return. I saw that. I saw you. And I decided in that moment that no one who had the power to help you would ever be allowed to hurt you again." Outside, the November sun broke through the clouds, and the snow on the ground began to glisten. 1 year later, the penthouse stretched across the 42nd floor of a tower that touched the clouds. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the entire city of San Francisco, and the lights below burned like 1,000 fallen stars. Mia stood at one of these windows, her reflection ghostly against the glass, and she barely recognized the woman looking back at her. She wore a dress the color of deep wine, tailored to her frame, expensive in a way that felt natural now. Her dark hair fell in waves past her shoulders, no longer pulled back in the tight knot of a maid's bun. Her hands, once raw from bleach and hot water, were smooth and manicured. In the year since that mountain lodge, since the surgery that saved Oliver's life, since Preston Mercer's arrest was broadcast on every news station in the state, everything had changed. She had enrolled in night classes at San Francisco State University, studying social work and trauma recovery. During the day, she worked as the director of the House of Hope, a foundation that Luca had established in her name. The foundation provided emergency financial assistance to hospitality workers, paid legal fees for those reporting abuse, and offered transitional housing for women fleeing exploitation. 347 people had passed through its doors in the first 12 months. 347 people who had been invisible, and who were invisible no longer. The evidence against Preston Mercer had been meticulous. Video footage from the hotel security cameras, financial records showing the stolen tips, testimony from 17 other women he had harassed. All of it had been released simultaneously to every major news outlet. Within 2 hours, Preston's face appeared on every screen. Within 4, his former allies had abandoned him. The hotel chain had fired him publicly, issued a statement condemning his actions, and established their own compensation fund for victims. Preston Mercer was now serving 3 years in a federal facility, his name synonymous with predatory workplace behavior. His own daughter had changed her last name. Evelyn Blackwell's downfall had been slower but more complete. The evidence that she and Preston had worked together, that she had referred vulnerable workers to him knowing what would happen, that she had profited from their exploitation, had been leaked to an investigative journalist. The story ran for 6 weeks. Her charitable foundation, the one that had made her name synonymous with generosity, was investigated. Auditors found that less than 2% of donations had actually reached those in need. The rest had funded her art collection, her vacation homes, her appearance of benevolence. Evelyn had resigned from every board, every committee, every foundation. She had moved to a smaller city where nobody knew her name. She was no longer invited anywhere that mattered. She had become what she had always made others feel like, invisible. But Oliver was alive. That was the only number that had ever mattered. He was 8 years old now, and his heart beat strong and steady in his chest. The surgery had taken 5 hours and 32 minutes. The valve replacement had been a complete success. The cardiologist had used the word normal 3 times during the follow-up appointment, and Mia had cried at the word, this ordinary word that meant her son would grow up, would run without restriction, would become a man. Luca had learned to read bedtime stories. This began in the mountain lodge, during those first nights after Oliver came home from the hospital, still fragile, still frightened of the darkness. Mia had been reading to him, her voice hoarse with exhaustion, when Luca had appeared in the doorway of the small bedroom Luca had prepared. "May I?" he had asked. She had handed him the book, a children's story about a boy and a wolf, thinking he would read a page or two and then leave. Instead, he had sat at the edge of Oliver's bed and read the entire story, his deep voice carrying the weight of each word, his Italian accent making even the simple sentences sound like they contained mysteries. Oliver had fallen asleep with his small hand resting on Luca's wrist. Now, a year later, Luca read to Oliver every single night. They had moved through 23 books. Oliver had favorite passages that he asked Luca to repeat. Luca had learned to do different voices for each character. Marco had witnessed this once, Luca sitting cross-legged on a bed sized for a child, his enormous frame somehow gentle, his attention complete, and Marco had felt something shift in his understanding of what a man could be. The Moretti empire had begun its transformation at the same time. The legitimate businesses had expanded. Real estate development, restaurants, hotels managed with actual ethics, security firms that protected rather than threatened. The foundation bearing Mia's name now had a board of directors and an annual budget of $4 million. Money that had once been earned through coercion now flowed toward healing. Luca had established a scholarship fund for children of hospitality workers. Oliver's name was the first scholarship granted, given to a 7-year-old girl whose mother had escaped abuse 6 months earlier. The other businesses, the ones that had existed in the grey spaces, had been systematically dismantled or transferred. Luca had made phone calls, sent messages, restructured loyalties. The men who had served him understood that the era of certain operations was closing. Some had left the organization entirely. Others had moved into the legitimate ventures. Marco had become the general manager of a hotel in Napa Valley, running it with the same precision he had once used for darker purposes. Nino still served as Luca's right hand, but his work now involved lawyers and architects rather than men in black SUVs. Oliver's first word when he called Mia Mama had come on an ordinary Tuesday morning. They had been at breakfast, the 3 of them, in an apartment that Mia had chosen herself, decorated with her own taste, paid for with money she had earned. Oliver had been 7.5 years old. He had finished his juice and looked up at her and said, "Mama, can we go to the park?" Mia had frozen. She had not been called Mama. She had always been Mia, or Miss, or nothing at all. She had raised this child with every fiber of her being, had sacrificed everything, and had never assumed the right to that single word. Oliver looked confused. "Mama? Are you okay?" She had not been okay. She had crumpled into a chair and wept, not the quiet tears of resignation, but the enormous, gasping sobs of a woman who had finally been given permission to believe she was loved. Luca had knelt beside her chair, not speaking, just present, his hand resting on her back. Oliver had gotten down from his chair and pressed himself against her side, confused but loyal, the way children are when they do not understand but sense that comfort is needed. The park had been postponed. That afternoon had been spent in that apartment, the 3 of them existing in a kind of tender silence, the kind that does not require explanation. 2 months later, on a night when the city light seemed brighter than usual, Luca had taken her to the rooftop of this penthouse. The wind was cool against her skin, carrying the salt smell of the bay. He had brought no ceremony, no audience, no grand production. It was only the 2 of them and the city sprawled below them like a map of everything they had survived. He had knelt on one knee. Luca Moretti, who had spent 15 years commanding rooms with his silence, who had built an empire through calculated coldness, who had believed that grief had sealed something permanent inside his chest, knelt on the rooftop of a penthouse and asked Mia Vasquez to marry him. "I have loved you since the night you returned my wife's photograph," he said, his voice steady, each word placed with intention. "I have loved you since I understood that kindness still existed in the world, that a woman who had nothing would return the only precious thing I had left. I love you now. I will love you every day that remains to me. Say yes, and let me spend the rest of my life being the man you deserve. She had said yes while tears ran down her face, and when they returned downstairs, Marco was waiting by the window, and the moment he saw them, he had understood. Within the hour, news had spread through the organization. Luca Moretti, the man who had never allowed personal feeling to influence business, was getting married. The wedding had taken place 6 months later, in the garden of a small church in North Beach. Oliver wore a suit the color of slate. Mia wore white. Luca stood at the altar in a tailored suit and watched her walk toward him with an expression so open, so vulnerable, that even the men who had served him for decades looked away, respecting the privacy of something so raw. She walked without her father because her father was dead, had died on a kitchen floor when she was 9 years old. Marco walked beside her instead, this man who had become, through Luca, almost a family member himself. When Luca placed the ring on her finger, his hands were steady, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he was holding his breath. The ceremony lasted 20 minutes. The vows were simple. I promise to love you, Mia said, the way you loved my son before you loved me. Completely. Without condition. Forever. When they kissed, the small congregation applauded, and somewhere in the back of the church, Oliver clapped his small hands together. At the reception, Luca danced with Mia. He had learned to dance, too, somehow, in this year of learning gentle skills. He moved with her through a song by an artist she loved, and when the song ended, he pulled her close and whispered something against her ear that made her smile. Oliver danced too, standing on Luca's feet while Luca held him, both of them moving to the music. In the photograph taken of that moment, you could see 3 people who had each been broken, and who had chosen, despite everything, to become whole together. This is the story of what happens when the invisible are finally seen. This is what occurs when a man believes that power exists only to destroy, and then learns that power can also heal. This is the testimony of a woman who had $2 to her name and a dying child and a future that looked like the end of everything, and who instead found a man who would spend the rest of his life proving that love is the only thing that cannot be stolen, destroyed, or taken away. Mia Vasquez built something that mattered. Preston Mercer sits in a cell and remembers the moment his face appeared on every screen. Evelyn Blackwell lives in obscurity, finally knowing what it feels like to be nobody. Oliver grows taller every year, his heart strong, his future bright. And Luca, the man who had believed that grief was permanent and unchangeable, discovered that grief can transform into something else entirely. Not forgetting, but healing. Not moving on, but moving forward. This story teaches us that family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. That kindness in a broken world is not weakness but the most dangerous power of all. That the invisible deserve to be seen, and that sometimes, all it takes to change someone's entire world is one person who looks directly at them and says, I see you. And you matter. How did Mia's journey make you feel? What would you have done in her place? Have you ever known someone who went through something similar? Please leave a comment below and share what's in your heart. Every comment you leave is precious to us, a source of real motivation that helps us continue creating these meaningful stories. If this story moved you, subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share it with the people you love. We wish you all good health, a life filled with joy, and days overflowing with peace and happiness. Remember this, no matter how dark the night becomes, no matter how impossible your circumstances seem, after the rain, the sky always clears. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We will see you again in the next video. Goodbye.